the mine was already old when I got hired. And I want to be clear about that from the start, because most of what I'm going to tell you depends on understanding that the place had a memory of its own. Cerro Pacto sits about 4 hours east of Arequipa, up a road that stops being a road around the third hour and becomes a suggestion carved into the side of a mountain. The company that owned it had changed names twice since the 70s, but the men who worked there still called it by the old name, the Spanish one, and the older men crossed themselves when they said it. I took the job because my mother was sick and the pay was almost double what I could make in Lima. I'm not going to pretend it was bravery or ambition. It was arithmetic. She needed a surgery, and I needed to send money home every 2 weeks. And the mine paid in dollars if you signed a 1-year contract and agreed not to ask questions about the night shifts. I was 26. I had a diploma in industrial safety that nobody at Cerro Pacto ever asked to see. The first thing they gave me was a helmet, a lamp, a radio, and a small laminated card with 5 lines of text on it in Spanish. The card was the color of old butter, soft at the corners from being folded and unfolded. The foreman, a man named Aurelio who must have been close to 60, handed it to me without ceremony and told me to keep it in my breast pocket at all times. I asked him if I had to memorize it. He said no, that I would memorize it anyway, and that was a different thing. I want to read you what was on the card, because it matters later. It said, "Do not answer your name if it is called from inside a tunnel you have already cleared. Do not share your water with anyone whose lamp is off. If the air tastes sweet, walk, do not run. If you hear knocking in 3s, knock back once." And the last one, which was written in slightly smaller letters, as if it had been added later: "If you dream of the mine before your shift, report to the medic before you go down." I read it twice in front of him. He watched me read it. Then he took it back, folded it once more, and put it in my breast pocket himself, like a father pinning a flower on a son going to a dance. The work itself was not as bad as I had been told. We were extracting copper mostly, with some silver in the lower galleries, and the shafts were better ventilated than the stories on the bus had suggested. There were maybe 40 of us on rotation, split into 2 crews, and we lived in a bunkhouse about 1 kilometer from the entrance, downhill, near a small chapel that someone had built decades ago, and that nobody seemed to maintain, but nobody tore down either. The food was simple. The water was cold. The wind at night came down off the peaks and made the metal roof of the bunkhouse tick like a clock that was not quite keeping time. My first month was uneventful in the way that first months always are. I learned the names of the men on my crew. I learned which of them would talk during a shift and which would not. I learned that Aurelio had been at Cerro Pacto since he was 14, that his father had died in the mine in 1981, and that he never went past Gallery 7, which was the deepest one we still worked. There were galleries below 7. I saw them on the old hand-drawn maps in the office, 8 and 9 and a partial 10, but they were marked with a small symbol I didn't recognize, a kind of squared spiral, and nobody ever assigned anyone to them. I asked once. I asked a man named Beto, who was about my age and had been there 2 years. He said the lower galleries had flooded in the 90s and were unsafe. Then he changed the subject. The next day, I noticed that the floor of Gallery 7 was completely dry, and that the ventilation from below pushed up warm air, not the cold damp you'd expect from a flooded chamber. I noted this to myself. I did not bring it up again. The first thing that felt wrong happened in my 6th week. I was on the late shift, which ended at 2 in the morning, and I was walking back up the access tunnel with 2 other men when my radio chirped. It was the short chirp, the one that meant someone on the surface wanted to talk to a specific person, not the long one that meant general dispatch. The voice that came through was thin and a little hollow, the way radios sound when the signal is bouncing off too much rock. It said my name, just my name, twice, like a question. I keyed the mic and answered. There was a pause. Then the voice said, "Where are you?" I told it I was about 200 meters from the surface entrance, walking up with Beto and a man named Quisp. There was another pause. Then the voice said, "Thank you." and the line went quiet. When I got to the surface, the dispatcher on duty was a woman named Marta, who I knew well enough by then to joke with. I asked her what she had wanted. She looked at me for a long moment and said she hadn't called me. She said the radio log showed no outgoing transmissions on my channel for the last 40 minutes. She showed me the screen. It was true. There was nothing there. I told her about the voice. She did not laugh. She did not look surprised either. She wrote something down on a clipboard, a single line, and then she asked me if I had eaten dinner. I said I had. She said good, and that I should sleep early, and that if it happened again, I should not answer, even if the voice used my name, even if it sounded like someone I trusted. Then she went back to her crossword. I did not sleep early. I sat on the edge of my bunk for a long time, and I took the laminated card out of my pocket and read it again. Do not answer your name if it is called from inside a tunnel you have already cleared. I had cleared that tunnel. I had walked it. The voice had come from somewhere behind me, somewhere I had already passed. I started paying more attention after that, not in a frightened way, not yet. More the way you pay attention to a sound in your apartment that you've been ignoring for weeks, once you realize it isn't the refrigerator. I noticed that the older men, the ones who had been there 10 years or more, did certain small things that the newer men didn't. Aurelio always tapped the entrance arch twice with his knuckle before going in. A man named Juan always took off his wedding ring and left it in his locker before a shift, even though there was no safety reason to do so. The cook, who was almost as old as Aurelio, never served meat on a Tuesday, and when I asked him why, he said because Tuesdays were for the mountain and would not say more. There was also the logbook. Every shift had to be logged, entry and exit, by name and by gallery. The logbook lived in a small wooden box at the entrance, and it was the dispatcher's job to update it. I noticed in my second month that the logbook had more entries than there were men. Not by a lot, maybe 3 or 4 extra entries per week. They were always for the deeper galleries, 8 and 9, the ones nobody worked. The names were never the same twice, and when I looked them up in the personnel records, none of them existed. I mentioned this to Marta once, casually, the way you mention a typo. She said the logbook was old, and that sometimes it logged things on its own, and that the company had decided it was cheaper to keep using it than to replace it. She said this in the same tone she might have used to explain that the coffee machine sometimes added an extra sugar. I want to tell you about the dreams now, because that's really what this is about, and I've been putting it off the way Marta put off explaining the logbook. The first dream came about 3 months in. In the dream, I was walking through Gallery 4, which is one of the middle galleries, well lit and familiar, and I came to a junction that doesn't exist. In real life, Gallery 4 branches into 2 passages. In the dream, it branched into 3. The third passage was narrower, and the air coming out of it was warm, and I could hear, very faintly, the sound of someone breathing. I didn't go down it. I woke up. I went to my shift that morning and did not report the dream to the medic. I want to be honest about that. I read the card. I knew the rule. I told myself the dream wasn't really about the mine, that it was just stress, that the medic would think I was unstable and it would go on my file. I told myself a lot of things. The truth is, I was embarrassed. I was a grown man with a diploma, and the idea of going to the company doctor to report a dream felt like something a peasant from my grandmother's village would do. The dream came back 3 nights later. The same junction, the same warm air. This time, the breathing was a little louder, and I noticed that it was breathing in a rhythm, in and out, the way a person breathes when they're trying to be quiet. The third time the dream came, I went to the medic. His name was Dr. Sanabria, and he was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the kind of careful patience that doctors at remote sites tend to develop. His office was a converted shipping container with a cot and a desk and a single fluorescent tube that buzzed at a frequency just above hearing. I told him about the dream. I told him I had dreamed it 3 times. I told him about the junction that did not exist. He did not laugh. He did not look surprised. He asked me, very calmly, whether the third passage in my dream went down or sideways. I said down. He nodded. He wrote something on a card, not in a file, on a card, a small one, and he put the card in a wooden drawer that had other cards in it. I saw, just for a second before he closed the drawer, that the drawer was almost full. He told me I would be reassigned to the upper galleries for 2 weeks. He told me to drink more water and to avoid coffee after lunch. He told me, very gently, that if the dream came again, I should come back to him before my shift, not after. Then he gave me a small envelope of pills, which he said were a mild sedative, and which I later found out from Beto were just sugar. The dream did not come again for almost a month. When it did, it had changed. The junction was still there, but now there was a light at the end of the third passage. Not bright. The kind of light a single lamp makes when it's pointed at a wall, and the breathing was gone. Instead, there was a sound like someone setting down a tool very carefully on stone. I went back to Dr. Sanabria. He asked the same question. Down or sideways? I said down. He nodded. He wrote another he put it in the drawer. He told me to take a week off and visit my family. I did not visit my family. My mother had just had her surgery, and I didn't want her to see me looking the way I looked, which was thin and gray and prone to staring at things. I went to Arequipa instead. I stayed in a cheap hotel near the Plaza de Armas, and I tried to sleep without dreaming, and I mostly succeeded. But on the third night I dreamed of the junction again, and this time I was already walking down the third passage when I woke up. I came back to Cerro Pacto early. I didn't tell anyone about the third dream. I went down for my shift and I worked Gallery 4 for 8 hours, and I tried not to look at the place where the junction should have been. It was not there, of course. It never had been. Gallery 4 branched into 2 passages, the way it always had, and I walked both of them and they were the same as always. But on my way out, as I passed the spot, I noticed something I had never noticed before. The wall between the 2 existing passages was slightly warm, not hot, warm, like the wall of a house in the morning after the sun has been on the other side of it. I put my hand on it and held it there for maybe 10 seconds. Then I took my hand off and I walked out and I did not say anything to anyone. That was when I started keeping my own log. I kept it in a notebook I bought in town, a cheap one with a green cover, and I wrote in it every night after my shift. I wrote down what I had seen, what I had heard, what I had dreamed. I wrote down the small things the older men did. I wrote down the entries in the company logbook that didn't match any real person. I wrote down the dates that the cook didn't serve meat. After a few weeks, I started to see a pattern, although I didn't understand it yet. The Tuesdays without meat lined up with the days the logbook had extra entries. The extra entries were always for Gallery 8 or 9. The men who tapped the arch and removed their rings did so most reliably on those same days. I asked Aurelio about it. I waited until we were alone, eating lunch on a bench outside the bunkhouse, and I asked him, as casually as I could, what happened on Tuesdays. He chewed for a while before he answered. He was eating bread and a piece of cheese, and he ate slowly, the way men who have worked underground their whole lives tend to eat, as if food were a small ceremony. He said that on Tuesdays, the mine remembered. I asked him what that meant. He said that every place that men work in for a long time starts to remember them, and that some places remember more than others, and that Cerro Pacto remembered everything. He said this without drama, the way you might say that a particular dog was good with children. I asked him about the dreams. I asked him if other men had them. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said that the mind doesn't take everyone. He said at some men the dreams come and to some men they don't, and nobody knows why and there's no point asking. He said that the dreams were the mind's way of inviting you down. He said that the rule about reporting the dreams to the medic existed because the medic kept track of who had been invited, and that the company needed to know, because of the insurance. I asked him what the insurance was for. He said that men who dreamed of the mine before their shift sometimes did not come back up, and that the company had learned, over the years, that it was cheaper to keep track of who was being invited than to explain to the families afterward. He said this in the same tone he had used to describe the bread. I asked him if he had ever dreamed of the mine. He said yes. He said he had dreamed of it 3 times when he was younger, and that the 3rd time he had gone to the medic, and the medic had given him a different card to carry, a green one, and that he had carried it every day since. He took it out of his pocket and showed me. It was small and laminated and worn at the corners, and it had only 1 line of text on it, in Spanish. It said, "I have already been invited. I am not coming." He let me read it. Then he put it back in his pocket. I asked him what would happen if he ever lost it. He said he wouldn't. I want to tell you about the night of the collapse now, because it's the part you came to hear, and I've been moving toward it slowly because I don't fully know how to describe it, even after all this time. It was a Tuesday. I noticed that first, because by then I noticed everything. The cook had served lentils for lunch, no meat. The logbook had 3 extra entries that morning, all for Gallery 9. Aurelio had tapped the arch twice. The wind had been strange all day, pushing from the wrong direction, coming up the valley instead of down. I was working Gallery 6 with Beto and a newer man named Tito, who had been there only a few weeks. We were doing maintenance on a ventilation duct, nothing strenuous, and we were almost done when the radio chirped. The short chirp. The personal one. It said Beto's name. Beto was standing about 3 meters from me, with his lamp on, and he heard it the same time I did. He looked at me. I looked at him. We both knew what the rule was. Do not answer your name if it is called from inside a tunnel you have already cleared. We had cleared the tunnel behind us less than an hour ago. The voice said his name again. It sounded exactly like Marta. It had her cadence, her slight rasp, the way she always drew out the 2nd syllable of his name a little longer than necessary. He did not answer. The voice said his name a 3rd time, and then, after a pause, it said, "Your wife called. She needs you to call her back." Beto's wife had given birth to their first child 2 weeks earlier. He had been showing us pictures every day. He took a step toward the radio before he caught himself. I saw him catch himself. I saw the exact moment his hand stopped halfway to the mic. He looked at me again. He did not key the mic. He turned the radio off completely, and he set it down on the ground, and he sat down next to it and put his head in his hands. The voice kept calling, even with the radio off. It came from the radio anyway, low and patient, saying his name and saying that his wife had called and that the baby was fine, but that she needed to talk to him. It said this for about 2 minutes. Then it stopped. Then we heard the knocking. It came from the wall to our left. 3 slow knocks. Not loud. The kind of knock a person makes when they're being polite. We all heard it. Tito, who didn't know the rule, started to knock back twice, the way you would if you were answering a door. I grabbed his wrist before he could finish the 2nd knock. I knocked back once, the way the card said. Beto did not move at all. There was a long silence. Then the knocking came again, from a different part of the wall, further down. 3 knocks. I knocked back once. The knocking moved again. 3 knocks. I knocked back once. It kept moving, further and further down the gallery away from us, until I couldn't hear it anymore. We sat there in the dark, because somewhere in the last few minutes all 3 of our lamps had gone off, although I don't remember any of them flickering. When the lamps came back on, the gallery looked the same. The ventilation duct was where we had left it. The radio was where Beto had set it down. But the wall to our left, the one the knocking had come from, had a small opening in it that had not been there before. It was about the size of a doorway. The edges were smooth, not jagged, as if the rock had decided to be a door. Inside the opening, I could see a passage going down, narrow, lit faintly from somewhere deeper. Tito started to walk toward it. I grabbed his arm. He looked at me with a kind of dreamy confusion, the way a child looks when you wake them up too early, and he said, "But they're calling me." I asked him who. He said he didn't know. He just knew that they were. That was when the collapse started. It didn't sound the way I expected a collapse to sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a long, slow exhale, like the mountain breathing out, and then a series of cracks that moved through the rock around us in a pattern, not random, going from the far end of the gallery toward us, one crack after another, evenly spaced. The lights went out again. The ground tilted. I grabbed Tito and pulled him away from the opening, and Beto grabbed his radio and turned it back on, and the three of us ran. I don't remember most of the next part. I remember running. I remember Beto's lamp coming back on at some point, and seeing dust in the air so thick it looked like fog. I remember a sound behind us that was not a sound a mine makes. A kind of wet, patient sound, like something settling into place. I remember Tito stumbling and me pulling him up. I remember the access tunnel and the long climb and the moment we came out into the night air, and the cold of it hitting my face, and Aurelio standing at the entrance with his arms crossed, not moving, watching us come out, as if he had known exactly when we would arrive. 23 men did not come out that night. 23. The official report said it was a structural failure caused by water damage in the lower galleries. The company paid the families. There was a ceremony. The chapel near the bunkhouse was used for the first time in years. The names of the 23 men were read out at the ceremony. I listened to all of them. 7 of those names I had seen before. They had been in the logbook, the extra entries, the ones that didn't match any real person. They had been logged into Gallery 9, 3 and 4 and 5 months before the collapse. I had written them down in my green notebook. I checked. They matched. I left Cerro Pacto 2 weeks later. I broke my contract. I gave back the dollars I hadn't sent home yet. Aurelio walked me to the bus stop, which is something he had never done for anyone as far as I knew. At the stop, he handed me a small envelope. Inside it was a green laminated card. It was blank. He told me to write on it whatever I needed to write, and to carry it with me, and not to lose it. I wrote on it that night, in the hotel in Arequipa. I wrote the same line Aurelio had on his. I have already been invited. I am not coming. I keep it in my wallet. I have carried it for almost 4 years now. I want to tell you, finally, about the dreams, because that's the part that hasn't stopped. I do not dream of the mine the way I used to. I do not dream of the junction in Gallery 4. I do not dream of the third passage, or the warm air, or the sound of someone setting down a tool. Those dreams stopped the night of the collapse and they have not come back. What I dream of now is harder to describe. I dream of ordinary places, my apartment in Lima, the bus stop near my mother's house, the corner store where I buy bread in the morning. And in these dreams, everything is correct. Everything is where it should be. Except that somewhere, just out of sight, there is a passage that should not exist. I never see it directly. I only know it's there. Sometimes I hear, very faintly, the sound of someone breathing in a rhythm, the way a person breathes when they're trying to be quiet. Sometimes I hear 3 slow knocks, from the wall of my bedroom, or from the floor of the bus, or from inside the refrigerator at the corner store. I have not knocked back. I have not answered. I keep the card in my wallet and I touch it sometimes, through the leather, just to know it's there. I called Aurelio about a year ago. I had gotten his number from Beto, who still works at Cerro Pacto, although he never goes below Gallery 5 anymore. I asked Aurelio if the dreams ever stopped. I asked him if his had stopped, after he started carrying the card. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said no. He said the card didn't stop the dreams. He said the card stopped the answer. He said that the mind kept inviting, the way an old uncle keeps inviting you to a house you don't want to visit, and that the card was just a way of saying no politely every day for the rest of your life. He said that as long as I carried it, and as long as I never answered, I would be fine. I asked him what would happen if I lost it. He said the same thing he had said before. He said I wouldn't. I have not lost it. I check for it before I leave the house. I check for it before I go to sleep. I have laminated it a second time over the first lamination because the corners were starting to wear. Last week I was in a hardware store near my apartment looking for a new shower head, and I heard, from somewhere in the back of the store, a voice that sounded almost like my mother's calling my name. My mother lives 4 hours away. She does not visit me at hardware stores. I did not answer. I walked out, slowly without running, and I took the long way home, and when I got back to the apartment I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time with my hand in my pocket, touching the card, and I waited until the feeling passed. It always passes. That's the part I want you to understand. It always passes. The dreams come, and the voices come, and the small wrong details come, and they always pass, and I am always still here in my apartment, with the card in my wallet and the lights on and the door locked. But I want to tell you one more thing, and then I'll stop. 2 months ago, I was cleaning out my closet, and I found the green notebook, the one I had kept at Cerro Pacto. I hadn't opened it in years. I sat down on the floor of my bedroom and I read through it, page by page, and most of it was the way I remembered it. The logbook entries, the Tuesdays, the dreams, the names of the 7 men. But on the last page, in handwriting that was mine and also not mine, there was a single line that I do not remember writing. It said, "You have been invited 4 times. I had only dreamed of the mine 3 times before the collapse. I am sure of that. I counted them. I wrote them down. 3. I do not know when the 4th one was. I do not know if it has happened yet. I have thought about this every day for 2 months, and I have not slept well. And I keep the card in my hand now, not in my wallet, when I go to bed. I hold it the way a child holds a small toy. I tell myself that as long as I am holding it, I cannot answer, even in my sleep. But sometimes, in the morning, when I wake up, my hand is empty, and the card is on the nightstand, and I do not remember putting it there.